talking to you folks, and then the rest of the time that we've scheduled, we're just going to spend answering questions that you may have pertaining to whatever is on your mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about factors affecting the farm that we're going to see here in the next few years, and then we're going to discuss some benchmarks that we might want to look at achieving on our own personal farms. And of course, anything we present here today is just from our perspective and our research. Of course, every farm is a little bit different, and therefore some indicators for some farms may be a little bit different than others, so please keep that in mind. Just really briefly talking on what we're expected to see here in the next few years. And these would be the number 3 things that I see as affecting our farm. First one being the volatility and the variability we've been seeing in input and output prices. For those of you that were at Farm Tech, we showed a number of slides to kind of demonstrate this. But the important point here is this does seem to be here, and it is something that we seem to be facing as farms. So as something to help get past this, the first thing we need to do is sit down, sharpen our pencils, and find out what the break-even of our farm is and what is required for us to generate consistent returns each year. Typically, you know, a lot of people that we talk to, they say, well, we're in a commodity market and I take whatever the market gives me. And I mean, the strategy maybe had some merit in the past, but now with the way the volatility is, we need to really figure out how we can smooth this out and generate more consistent returns. Number 2, and this is a big thing, interest rates right now. I opened up my mortgage statement, and my interest rate on my house is 1.4% at the moment. I'm on a variable mortgage, and this is essentially free money that we've had over the past couple years. Good time to be, you know, maybe purchasing equipment if you're looking at expanding and you're in a position to do so. A lot of us have invested this money back into our farms and whatnot. But what we need to understand is that there's only one way for interest rates to go now, and you know, it's not down. It's going to be up. So again, sharpening our pencils and looking what our farm situation is going to look like if interest rates rise 4 to 6%. What does this mean to your term loans and all the other outstanding loans that you may have? 4 to 6%. Maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but I'll show you a couple slides that would indicate that this could potentially be have a bigger impact on our farm than what we think. And number 3 thing that I see as a threat to the farm is our cash flow situation. And I'll show you a slide that indicates this coming up here. But the key for us to do here is to sit down and look to the past, right? Just like we said at Farm Tech, look in the rearview mirror to see where we are going forward. And clearly understand your revenues and expenses, as well as where we think interest rates are going to be, and use this to base forecast what you're going to need to earn on your farms in the future. And of course, for some of us that have been around the business long enough, we have lots of equity, and we farm just for fun now. This isn't such a big issue, but for young farmers in their 30s or 40s, or farms that are looking at expanding or have recently expanded, we're at particular risk. So take action now and sit down and figure these three things out, because there's going to be a lot we can learn from doing this exercise. This slide here just talks about the cash flow. The black line is energy prices, and of course the inputs we buy on our farm are directly tied to what energy prices are doing. And the blue line is agricultural prices, and this is from the start of 2008 through to current time. And the agriculture line includes livestock as well. There's no data to separate crops and livestock out. But what you can see is since January 2009, and I don't know, does my mouse show up when I'm moving it?
Yes.
Okay. This space in here, as we can see, it's starting to increase, right? Which means that our input costs are getting more expensive, but yet the prices we're receiving for our goods are starting to remain static. And so this shows that we're going to have some stress on our margins coming up. And you know, if the trend line continues, what we're going to see is the input costs start chipping away more at our profitability. For those of you of Farm Tech, this slide will look familiar. This is one that just goes to show over the last 20 years what Alberta farm debt has done. And the blue line is the debt load, and over the past 20 years we've seen farm debt increase from $6 billion to about $12 billion. So it's doubled. And right now, if we calculate our debt payout, and this is a good exercise for us to be doing at home too, what we do is we look at all the debt we have outstanding, and we take our yearly net income and we divide it into the debt outstanding to figure out how many years it would take if we directed all our net income to paying off our debt. And currently in Alberta, the number is 6 years. And whether 6 years is a good number or not, I think it depends on the farm. But as you can see, the bottom line is our net farm income. So that pink line hasn't been changing too much over the past 20 years, but yet the debt load is increasing. And again, this separation is growing, indicating an alarming trend that possibly isn't sustainable going down the road. So sit down and calculate this debt payout for yourselves and start asking yourself questions if it's due to just a couple years in farming where the weather didn't cooperate and your crops were poor, or if it's due to the fact that maybe you have made equipment purchases and maybe the debt you have doesn't match the efficiency and scale of your operation. But kind of figure out where you lie on this curve. So let's talk about forecasted prices here upcoming. And this is from Informa Economics, who are usually fairly reliable with their forecasts. Of course, it is just a forecast, and things can change. But we're not seeing anything here that would jump out at us and make us feel really, really optimistic, like we did in 2008. And I guess we need to figure out, if barley is around $3 or canola is around $8. What does this mean in terms of our production costs? What type of margins are in there? Going back to that point on break even. And my guess is that, I remember when we planted barley and we used it as a rotation crop. It was never stellar, but we always did make money. And my guess is even at $3, most farmers in the province can make money. The question is how much. We have to understand that. And of course, if it's costing us more than $3 an acre, we also have to understand that and understand that maybe there's another crop we need to be looking at instead. Again, a slide from Farm Tech, just to reiterate the volatility we've been seeing in input prices. If we look at diesel, for instance, in 2008 it rose 45%, and then the following year it fell 50%. Same with fertilizer, rose 160%. Following year it fell 150%. And so these are the type of things we're dealing with on the farm nowadays, and it means we have to be a little bit more astute with predicting what's happening out there in the market. So how can we do this? Well, we were listening to David Cole, and he gave us 3 real simple indicators to help us do this. First one is look at the GDP of emerging countries. And if they're growing between 10 and 20%, that's a sign that they're going to be trying to buy up almost everything in sight, which means it puts pressure on the prices of oil, it puts pressure on the commodities that we grow as farmers. But right now we're in a recession and they're growing at 3%. These countries aren't quite having the demand that they did, and that's why we're seeing maybe prices being a little bit softer than what we'd like. The next thing he talked about is inflation cycles, and when inflation rises, of course, interest rates rise. And if history repeats itself, we're looking at about another year to a year and a half of low interest rates. Again, this is just based on what's happened in the past, and usually it's a pretty good indicator of what's going to happen in the future. So if that happens, we might be looking at it, and anything I've heard would indicate we're looking at between a 4 and 6% rise in interest rates over the next few years. And then finally, for us folks, just to look at our farms and once in a while go online, and I mentioned this at Farm Tech as well, just look at what oil is doing. Go on a site like Globe and Mail Investor and look at the yearly trend, because what happens with oil almost perfectly predicts what's going to happen with the price of our farm fuels. And this graph here just kind of shows it going back over the past couple of years. You can see that I have diesel as an example, but purple gas is the same thing. It almost perfectly tracks what oil does. So as oil rises, so do these farm input costs. Right now, actually, this week, oil dropped a little bit, but it looks like it's back on the rise. You know, so it's just something to follow over time, and if you can get a feel that there's a trend happening, you know, a month at a time or a couple months at a time, it's probably a good indicator that that trend is going to continue. Same thing for blended fertilizer, the cost of, or sorry, natural gas, the cost for blended fertilizer, and NH3 follows that. So this is the part where Merle is going to jump in and he's going to talk about what a bench level farm looks like in Alberta based on some numbers we put together, and then he's going to talk about some key indicators for us to look for on our farms.
Okay, thanks, Mark. As well, thank you all for attending this new technology, and hopefully that it's working well at your end of the computers and scales here. Okay, on this one here, this is just trying to go back and look at a farm to get an idea of what I've seen over the change the last, say, 10 years. Proper size and scope. Those numbers are trying to come up with a traditional small family farm, you know, with not a lot of off-farm income, and they're looking at trying to, you know, sustain their operation. And I think what Mark was, some of the things he was talking about, which is really, really important, is this cost to gross revenue, and I call it kind of like an operational efficiency, and that'll be on the next slide. But you know, I think we need to figure out, going back over 5 years, is what is your operating cost, and that includes as well rent. I think that's one of the things we want to talk about is rental rent costs, and we look at your operational costs. Because that is, of course, same as buying fertilizer if you have to access land. So the $300,000 to $400,000 is just kind of a number. I think it's come up about $100,000 to $150,000 from 5 years ago, mainly based on the increased size of farms. Net farm income is, as you can see there, is roughly 20% of that gross income. And that's kind of where we're seeing is most traditional farms running between 20-25% of gross. It goes down to their net farm income level, which is an income level which we're going to use a lot in some of our talks and indicators in the next slide. The debt levels, Mark mentioned 6 times of your net income. Look at your total debt load. That is a neat indicator because it does kind of show whether or not you can repay debt on a 20% margin on net farm income. And so on what we're trying to do here is keep your debt level less than 40% to assets, and take your land out. Look at your debt load not to land, because of course all of us have debt less than 40% if we take land at fair market value. But as an accountant background, of course, this is less than 40% debt to cost. So if you can take your land mortgage out and your land out and then look at debt to assets, a lot of you will be into that 40% level, and anything above that, I get nervous. So this is a solution here. Take your land to the side, take your mortgage to the side, and see what's left on machinery and operating loans. Modest living expenses. Those who have heard me over the years, I think this is one of the most difficult things to ascertain and pay, especially in a 2-generational farm, where both generations want to have the $50,000 to $60,000 of living expenses. And of course, if you're a mathematician at all, you take that 50,000 and you can see your net farm income is only 60 to 90. There isn't much room there if there isn't off-farm income. And that's a concern I have on a lot of traditional family farms, is the cost of living is the greatest cost against the business. The retirement plan, there is more for an intergenerational transfer. If we're going to maintain 2 family farms with the ups and downs in the cash flows going forward, I think we're trying to show that the parents will have to get about 80% of their income from off-farm sources by the time they're 60 to 65. And that just goes to show that that off-farm income can come from different sources, of course. It can come from your investments, but perhaps even oil wells or surface leases should be counted as the retirement plan income rather than operating income for the farm. And off-farm income, we'd love to have that, of course. If anyone can have a small source of income, we're showing that as about $25,000 to that level of $300,000 to $400,000 farm gross. You jump that by 50% to 450 to 600, then we don't need the off-farm income level. So just kind of a number again is most of our stats show that between the $300,000 to $400,000 gross level, there has to be off-farm income in there to sustain a viable operation and a family unit. And the debt levels, as Mark just mentioned, efficiency and scale of the operation. I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about one debt level I want you to look at. So we'll go to the next slide, Mark, if you don't mind, please. Okay, so here's the key indicators I think I want you guys to write down, and I'll take my time on these. With going forward in the spring of 2010, the biggest concern I see is operating loans. The benchmark I'm using is take your current operating loan, let's say of January 1st, look at all your unsold inventory that you have in your bins at this present time, and if that number is exceeding 50% of your unsold inventory, I think you're in a very precarious cash flow position, especially with those forecasts of commodity prices going into 2010. If farming lives on cash flow, as we all know, and therefore it's really, really important, I believe, to make sure that those operating loans are checked. I'll give you guys a little bit of an example on this one. I was talking to a farmer the other day, and it was a cattle rancher actually, and we looked at his total debt load 202 before BSE hit. I asked him what his total debt load is today. There has been no capital purchases of land, so that was not an issue. We looked at the amount of cows he has over those time frames, and I asked him a very quick question. It's not hard to figure out how his health indicator is. I just said to him, how many cows you have, and alternatively, what's your machinery line worth? Is it worth more or less than the year before, than 6 years ago? We plugged the numbers in about 5 minutes, and effectively, his increase in debt has been an accumulation of losses. And so on the operating loan as well, try to determine if the operating loan has been used for capital purchases, and if it has, maybe you should turn some of that operating loan out. A lot of loans, a lot of equipment loans, machinery purchases in 2009 were on operating loans because of the low interest rates. So check out your debt and your loans as to the terms of those loans to make sure they're in the right spot on your balance sheet. Operating expenses, this is one I just mentioned earlier. I like to have it less than 65% of gross revenue. Most of the grain farms the last 3 years have averaged around 52 to 55. But I think that's an important point. Operating expenses, again, is all your operating costs that are deductible for income tax, and also land rent I like to put in there because it is an actually operating cost. If you go over that number consistently over the past 4 years, you'll find that you are not efficient enough to carry much debt. Now the next one is for you, on the gentlemen and ladies on the phone that perhaps are looking at, should I stay farming or not? I'm 62 years old, let's say, and I'm deciding whether or not I want to maintain the stress level or the profitability of my farm, and no one's coming back to actually farm with me. That one I'm kind of looking at, if you're going to continue to farm, if you can't do 2 times cash rent, I don't know if it's worth staying in the game. And it's something I just use to talk to older farmers to see if they should be better off to rent their land out rather than looking at continuing on with their operations trying to maintain machinery investment. It's just an indicator of whether or not you can maintain your equipment, not grow it, but just maintain it and kind of run out your career. Machinery investment, this one is I think also very, very interesting, is looking at your equipment total investment shouldn't be more than 2 times your gross revenue per acre averaged over the past 5 years. What this is about is not, we have some machinery efficiencies on, for example, Gary Pike. You guys have all heard him speak over the years. On your air drills, he wants 100 feet per foot as kind of the seeding efficiency. And I'm saying taking those kind of agronomic indicators but put it back to a financial basis. I'm looking at 2 times gross revenue. When you look at the average operating margin is the maximum you can carry. So if you get over that, you've got 2 choices. Find more land to farm to get your machinery efficiency up. And when you look at that on a risk going forward basis, a lot of the younger farmers around Didsbury that I work with, we're looking at custom seeding versus renting more land. If you rent more land, of course, if you have a high cash rent, that risk, especially with these lower commodity prices, perhaps custom work is a better option if your machinery is underutilized. And for long term, we put two together there, I guess, is the same, almost the same comment, and that is government programs, your case, agri-stability. If you're a cattle producer, in some ways, we've lived off this for the last 6 years, and it is not sustainable, and that's why the cattle and the hog industry is in such dire straits right now. But as well, going forward in your grain, we have to look at this and saying, hey, as an industry, not just your own individual farms, we have to get at least 80% of our net farm income from the market and not rely totally on government support programs. And then the last comment there is off-farm income, trying to tie that back to my 80% of retirement income. If you can, diversify some of your investments off the farm. I think you'll find that will be a prudent investment. This generation of farmers who are now 50 to 65 have done that quite successfully versus a lot of the older generation who didn't do that. But I do think it's important to look at so that we don't have to rely on the farm to pull out both generationals' income in the future. So I guess, Rick and Mark, that's the end of our overheads, but we'd sure love now if we have a chance to answer any questions that have come forth. As well, I do believe, Mark and Rick, we've decided to put this presentation, it's being recorded, so if you haven't had time to write these down, you can access off the Canola Growers Commission's website.
That's right. We will have this available on our website after. I'm just looking to see if we've had any questions come in here. One question, is their presentation from Farm Tech available? It's very similar to this presentation, as well as their preceding submission is available on the farmtechconference.com website. Question here from Dallas, where does equipment leasing fit in?
Okay, I'll answer that. I like equipment leasing. But you have to remember two things. For a tax strategy, it's fantastic. And for those who are looking at buying equipment perhaps this year or in the fall, please talk to your accountant about leasing versus purchasing. I don't have time to give you all the examples today, but one real quick strategy is to lease the machine in 2010, but actually give them the down payment in 2011 with your trade-in. So that way you get the depreciation off your trade-in in 2010, but you also get the lease payment deductibility and then trade off the tractor in 2011 so that you get a double whammy effect. You got your depreciation plus the lease payments. On a financial basis, leasing is fine, except that what I find when young farmers want to lease, usually they're trading in dad's old equity. So you sell off the old tractor for part of the lease payments, and it's fantastic. It shows you very little payments, and you get this large new machine to work with. My caution to you is then push that out forward 3 or 5 years, and then when you have to get the next lease machine, are you going to be in a position to be able to afford the lease payments? If you can, then I think leasing does give you a lot of options. There is quite a bit of leased equipment in the Olds area in the last couple of years rather than owning everything. But you know, it's just a matter of don't allow yourself to be tricked into a very low lease payment in the first time you lease a tractor or combine because of your down payment. That's all I'm saying. Make sure you understand that the next time you lease, it could be up 30 to 40% higher because not of the trade-in.
I think if I had a comment there too, and this is one of my little soapboxes based on how leveraged we are in Alberta. Purchasing equipment is, you know, it's a good idea, and we need to do it before, you know, our equipment gets too old. But the one thing in Alberta that we do never consider being an option is just if, you know, maybe you're taking on more land. I don't know your situation, so it makes sense to purchase a new piece of equipment. But there's always the option of putting a little bit of money into maintaining the one we have. We see this a lot in the U.S. and we see this a lot in Europe too. Very large-scale farms hardly ever run new equipment like we do here. I'm not saying we shouldn't run new equipment. I'm just saying always be cautious of the fact that you know, there is the option of maintaining the piece we have, which will certainly help us in terms of our cash flow going down the road.
We have a question from Murray. If cash rent only, if cash rent only income, are you still a farmer?
Oh, it depends. If you have cash rent only as a receipt of income, no. Revenue Canada has stated that cash rent is return on investment of land, and therefore you are not farming for purposes of filing the income tax. Having said that, though, this is a whole other talk, and we'll add a fourth one to our series down the road about farmers who are renting their property out. There's been major changes to the capital gains exemption and the rollover rules. So if you are worried about your transferring the land to the next generation or claiming your exemption, cash rent is perfectly fine for 99.99% of all farmers. So don't mix up cash rent as being a concern for your estate or succession planning of your land. You're now more interested is if you have cash rent only, can you deduct your utilities, can you get farm fuel number for your purple gas and diesel, and that indicators is a different story. But for purposes of Revenue Canada, filing on a personal tax return is treated as investment income, which of course if you're a personal taxpayer, it makes no difference whether you get $25,000 cash rent for land as farm income or investment income, it's still taxed at your personal rates. But there's a whole other issue there, Rick, regarding transferring property under those rollover and exemption sections of the Act.
Okay, no other
yeah,
questions?
If you were,
sorry, I was just going to say, if there's any other questions, please feel free to type them in. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just say to follow up for that, if you were to do an arrangement, 1/3, 2/3, like a lot of farmers do, then it does qualify, correct, Merle?
It qualifies as more of a farm income, but there is a potential that you still treat it as non-farming if you had a strong audit. But a lot of crop shares do qualify as farm income because revenue isn't too worried about those agreements. I would suggest our next webinar is going to be talking a lot on cash rent versus other options. And so we're not going to spend not much time left today, but I would like you guys have time to tune in next time we talk. And Rick, I noticed when you had your slide up, you had the next two webinars on the same date.
Oh, sorry.
So that was a mistake. But I do think that we can talk about that a lot more. I think we have to be more innovative in our cash rents, and we mentioned that in the Farm Tech. And just as a teaser for those who weren't there, we're looking at tying cash rent perhaps maybe to a crop insurance proxy, and so we'll show you that in our next seminar. But at these cash prices going forward, with canola's down to $8 and wheat's down to $5, and barley's $3, we have to make sure we're not giving our landlords huge amounts of return on their assets. I know it's a competitive environment out there for this land, but make sure you do your penciling out to see that this rented land is bringing you back a margin that you can live with.
Okay, no other questions. Just a comment from Dean thanking you guys for a good job on the presentation today. If there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up. I'll just give it a few seconds in case someone's typing one in as we go. I've changed the dates on your screen there, so it is the 17th and the 24th, the next two Wednesdays, and yeah, hopefully you guys found this a valuable use of your time. There will be a few questions as you log out of the program that'll help us go forward in planning these. And again, any suggestions, comments, or ideas you have about how we can make better use of everybody's time by doing some of these meetings online, we'd love to hear from you. Again, my email address is rick@canola.ab.ca. Go ahead, Merle.
Just before you leave, Mark and I are both open to phone calls. And so when you noticed we had our email addresses up there, I won't give you our numbers because you won't remember them quick enough. But remember 310-FARM. When you phone that number, you can ask either for Mark, Muchka, or Merle Good, and we're more than willing to talk to you guys about this because this is how we learn as well. We need the interaction from you as producers. Talk about your own particular case gives us a lot of value. That's where these numbers came from. These indicators was working with individual producers and looking at some of their past records so that we can actually help each other go forward and help the farmers of the province.
Yeah, and folks too, if I'd be willing to sit down, come out to someone's farm and sit down and talk about some of the stuff we talked about, in exchange for you guys, maybe sharing a little bit of your knowledge or your information about your farm's operations and your financial information. Of course, is all confidential, but again, that's how we learn and that's how we come up with some of this stuff. So if you're interested in that, please let me know.
Okay, there was one more question came in. Barbara asked, is there any way of getting the first part of this webinar as I signed in late? Provided that I operated this webinar right on my first go, we'll have it available online. I will send a link out as a follow-up email to everyone who participated today, and then it will hopefully be available within the next few days on our canola.ab.ca website. So if there's no further questions, we're going to end the webinar right now. Thank you very much, Mark and Merle, for your time today, and thank you everybody who tuned in and took part in this first webinar with canola.ab.ca. Again, visit our website, sign up for our newsletters, and that's the best way to make sure that you know about future events coming up, such as this one. At that point, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Okay, bye.